In this presentation, we will set up new company information and preferences within QuickBooks Online. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars file. This is a file that's going to be new. This is going to be a new company file. We're going to need to set up a new company file with nothing in it in order to continue and follow along with the step-by-step process of entering data into this new QuickBooks file. If you'd like to follow along with your own data and you've already set up information into QuickBooks, that's great, but we may not be able to go step-by-step through the process. We can then apply the skills we're learning, however, to that company file. If you would like to continue with the practice file for QuickBooks, you can do that as well. But again, the data will be different. So when we enter new data, it will differ from what's in that file as well. If you want to get a free 30-day or whatever the discount is being offered by QuickBooks at this time, might be worth doing that so you can enter the data in a step-by-step process from scratch. Entering data from scratch and starting how to set up the company is really how we learn to see all the pieces and how all the pieces fit together. We have already purchased the QuickBooks file and entered some of the data. If you want to go back to the first presentation in order to see that, for us to see the purchase process, that will set up some of the company information for the online process, for the online file, including the name of the company and some basic information in order to set up the account. Once that is set up, we'll have our file set up as we do here. We're going to call our file Get Great Guitars. We're going to continue to enter the data into this new company file, this company file that has nothing in it. And if you want to get the most out of the data input from this point forward, it would be best to have a file that has nothing in it to follow along with. We're now going to go up to the company preferences within our new file. That's going to be in the cog up top. So we're going to go into this cog, and we're going to go to the Your Company section, and we're considering the account and settings. So we want to look at the account and settings options. Some of these basic settings will have been set up for us. For example, if we go up to the upper left, we can see we're in the company tab. So we have the tabs on the left. We start off on the company tab. Up top, we've got the company name. If we select that item or select this pencil, it will then give us the detail for that so we can then change it if we so choose. We currently have the company name, Get Great Guitars. This is a requirement in order to set up the company file. So when we purchase the company file, when we set up the company file, when we make the payments to QuickBooks or set up the payment options for QuickBooks in order to have the QuickBooks Online, we of course will need to set up a company name. So that minimum amount will be there as we set up a new company file. Next, we can choose to add a logo if we so choose. I'm just going to add a little guitar logo just to give us an example of that. We have added the image if you would like to upload the image as well, but any type of image that's going to be a picture file, a JPEG file, is something that we can then upload. If we select this item, we're going to then select the plus and then locate where the logo is. Mine is on the desktop, so if I go to the desktop, we're going to choose this guitar, and we're going to say that's going to be our logo for now, just to practice inputting this information. Once uploaded, we'll go ahead and save that. And there we have it. You can experiment with the settings, how large, how many pixels you want to have the photo in order for it to look the best on your document. So that could take some adjustments, some tinkering with. We may go back to some more of these presentation formats at a later time. The next basic information we're going to have is, of course, the name that should be included. And then we're going to have the legal name. Here we're going to say that it's going to be the same as the company. If it's not, then we can uncheck this and put the legal name. So for example, we might have doing business as a current name and then have a separate legal name that we would include here. The next item is the EIN or employer identification number or the social security number. Note that really the name is all we need to keep going, to go forward, to enter data into the system. So if you're using QuickBooks to put in a minimal amount of information in order to track data, and you don't need to input information such as a social security number or EIN number, not a required field, it might be best not to do so. However, if we're going to have something like employees, we're going to need an EIN number. And if we're going to be dealing with someone in order to issue 1099s or something like that, another reason we might want an EIN number or may need an EIN number, which is an employer identification number. The social security number is probably one that we may be required to use in some cases to report information such as for 1099 information. or information for the Internal Revenue Service. However, it's not our preferred number we would like to use on the business information. So in other words, the employer identification number, the EIN number, is required if we have employees. Then we would need it for sure. However, we still may need some type of business number for other documentation, and therefore we may still want to get an EIN number even if we have no employees, which we can do. And if we don't have an EIN number and we need to put our some kind of information, our number for the IRS or for some other purposes for 1099 reporting, then we would have to default back to the Social Security number. So it's best, I would recommend, to have the EIN number, and if it's just informational type purposes and you don't have an EIN number, maybe you don't want to put a Social Security number either, you just leave it blank and start entering your data in. The EIN number can be found, or you can request one from the IRS website, irs.gov, just www.irs.gov. The EIN number, you can apply for one online here, or you can use a Form SS4, and you can look at the instructions related to the EIN number if that is something that your business may need. Back to the QuickBooks form, the EIN number will look something like this. Typically, it'll have two numbers, a dash, 5486485. That's going to be what we're using, made up EIN number. We'll save that then. That's going to be our typical information. Then we're going to go to the company type. Notice to choose the input screen, we'll just click on it, or we can click on the pencil, but you can click on any area. So if I'm up here and I click on any area down in the company type, it'll then go down to the input screen for the company type. We're going to select the tax form, and here are the options. Note that the tax form isn't as important as we might think in first glance. It's really important if we're going to be linking our information to some tax software in order to make the data input to the tax software easier. However, most of the time we're going to be generating reports, and we're going to be providing those reports such as the income statement and or balance sheet to a tax preparer in some way, and they'll then use that to do the data input. So our format that we have here, sole proprietor, that's going to be on the Form 1040 as Schedule C. A partnership or limited liability company reports at 1065. If we had a small business, then that would be a S corporation, 1120S, or a normal corporation, which would be at 1120, a nonprofit, a limited liability. Those are going to be our options. We're going to choose here the sole proprietor. So we'll take the sole proprietor. I'm not going to enter the industry at this time, and we're going to go down to the next piece, which is the contact information. QuickBooks is reminding me that I didn't have a save, so I'm going to save this information and then go down to the contact information. Within the contact information, we got the company email. We might have the customer email. If it's the same, it would be good. If it's not, then we're going to say maybe it's something different. Maybe we just have something like getgreatguitars@gmail.com. We'll enter our phone number. If we have a website, we can enter these. These aren't going to be required fields, but they could be informational fields. And as we enter the information for things like our invoices or other billing documentations, other forms, this can help to populate those forms. We'll save this, and we're going to scroll down to the address now. So we'll go down to the address item. We'll just make up an address now. So we're going to say 244, and we're going to say West 23rd Street, and we'll say this is a New York, and New York as the state. On the drop down, we're going to choose the zip code of 90011. This is going to be just a fake address. If you go there, you will probably not find a guitar shop, but that's what we'll have here. And this, of course, will then be useful to show up on some of our documents, including our billing documents, our invoicing documents. So we're going to have here, same as company address for the customer-facing address. If it were different, then we can select this, and we may want a different type of address. We might have different addresses for basically our company. Information might be different than, say, the information we want for the customer information. And then the legal address also, once again, may be something different. Our corporate office address possibly could be something different than any other address we may have. So it could be various reasons why we would want or need different addresses. We will now go ahead and save this. The next item is going to be the marketing preferences. So if we go to marketing preferences, this is going to be the type of information typically that we're going to get from QuickBooks. QuickBooks will provide us information for products and services. Much of it can be useful for related products, but of course we may want to turn those off. And we can do so by checking off these items, and we can go further through this information here. I'm going to close this back out. We're going to go back to the QuickBooks file. Next, we're going to go to the billing and subscription. So billing and subscription. The ID number up top, so this is going to be useful if you're communicating with QuickBooks. Then we've got the QuickBooks information, the subscription status, currently subscribed. If we select cancel, then we can change the status. Plan details, QuickBooks Plus, if we wanted to upgrade or choose a different gradient or format or level of the QuickBooks, then this is where we can do it. We could switch to annual billing if we so choose. This could be a cheaper option if we go to the annual billing, at least overall. Next change, then we've got the payment method. So if we wanted to change the way that our payment methods are, this is where we would go. Past payments, we could take a look at the history by selecting here. Payroll options, subscription status. We don't have any payroll at this time. We may look more into the payroll options at a later time and set some of that up and take a look at them in more depth. We've got the payments, subscription status, not subscribed, checks and supplies. If we wanted to order any checks and supplies, these are going to be types of things that could be supplemental to the QuickBooks, including checks that we can then put into the system and print with it, including 1099 forms and W-2 forms that we may need at the end of the year for contractors and payroll. Next, we're going to go to the Sales tab. We're going to keep most of the defaults here. If we start up top, we're going to say the Customize. If we go into the Customize field and look, we can start to customize some of the forms. We may get into more of the customization at a later time. We're going to concentrate on the preferences now. If we then select the pencil once again, or anywhere in this section, the sales form content, we can select the item, and we're going to keep most of the general preferences here. So I'll let you go through and look through these preferences. We're going to keep most of them as they are. We may come back into these at a later time. Some of the major ones are going to be the first item, preferred invoice terms, net 30 days. So when we have an invoice, when is it going to be due? And we're going to say we expect payment typically net 30 days. Some of the other default options, 15, 60. If we scroll down, then we also have the discount item. So if you want to have a discount, add a discount field to invoices. This could be useful to help customize your invoices. Then we have the deposit, add a deposit field to invoices. It could be useful for invoices. We may come back for this. Tips here, add a tips field to the invoices. So we're going to keep the default settings. Next, we'll go to the products and services. We'll just select this section and it'll show then the products and services. Make sure that in this section we have these items checked off. Show product and services. We want to track the quantity, price, rate, and we want to track inventory quantity on hand. This is going to be important because we want to be able to track the inventory. We want to be able to think about what the inventory is and allow QuickBooks to track that for us. So make sure that those items are as they are shown here. Then we're going to go to the progress invoicing. Keep the default setting, create multiple partial invoices from a single estimate. We'll have that on. And then the messages. This will be a very useful field for some people that are going to use the emailing from the QuickBooks system. So if we're emailing from QuickBooks, we can set the default email for things like invoices, and that'll make it really easy for us to send this information along with a connection to our email account, so that'll give the default email message and we won't have to basically write out the email message. So that can be very useful. Types of forms down below, we have the different types of forms. We've got the greetings, the invoice is going to be the default for this. We've got the subject up top, and then we've got the content of the email. So you can go through here, you can customize the content that you would prefer in the email. So for example, the default has the explanation marks and whatnot. We may want to make some adjustments to this, make it look more customized and formal for us, although basically it'll be the same in the standard that will be sent out for the emails. We can have email me a copy if we want to see a copy every time the invoice goes out. If we have a lot of invoice, this could be tedious. But if we don't have a lot and we want to make sure that this is working right and test this out, make sure that our invoices are going out properly, we can have this. We can also have the CC copy. This will show up in the email in the CC line. One that won't be in the major line, but it will be seen by everybody, and we can have that there. We also may want to have one in the BCC column. This is the blind column, so that we can have an email going to somebody that won't be shown to everybody else. And this is another way we can kind of test and see that everything is functioning properly using that blind email setting. Going to go down to the expenses tab now. So we'll select the expenses tab. If we go to the top section here, bills and expenses, we're going to keep the default here to show item table and expense and purchase forms. And if you want to go through the options and take a look at more detail of what these mean, you can select the question marks. We're going to go then to the purchase orders. Now this one we want to turn on. We're going to use purchase orders. So we're going to turn this one on and use them in our practice problem. We won't use any custom fields at this time. We won't use custom numbers. We may come back to this option later. So we're going to save that. Just make sure you turn those on. And then we're going to go to the messages section. This is going to be the default message, same kind of thing as we saw for the invoices. This can be very useful if we're sending out the purchase out orders directly from the QuickBooks system. We can have the default sending the email through the QuickBooks system, giving the subject, and then we can personalize the email a bit down here as well. We can email a copy to ourselves if we so choose. Next, we're going to go down to the payments. These are features QuickBooks offers in order to accept payments more easily through QuickBooks. So in other words, not just to track the transaction detail, but to accept and facilitate that payment information. So we have get paid more fast. We can take credit cards or bank transfers. We can learn more about this information if we select the learn more. We have the payment options up top, and we have the bank transfers down below. We'll let you read through some more of that. We may return to this at a later time. We're going to go back to our preferences. So then we have the existing account. If you do have an existing account, then you can connect the existing account here. So this would be, of course, to set up the account. This would be to connect any existing accounts for those payment options. Then finally, we have the Advanced tab down below. Up top, we have the accounting information. If we select on that, we'll then select it. Once again, you see these question marks will give you more detail. Note the first thing is your fiscal year. It's kind of funny because usually you think of these fiscal year ends. So when you think the fiscal year is going to end in December 31st, well, QuickBooks defines it by the start. So this doesn't mean that we're going to end in like January 31st. It means that we're starting January 1st and therefore ending in basically a calendar year being also our fiscal year. So just be careful of that. Make sure that you're setting up the year that you're desiring and don't choose, for example, December, because then it'll just start at December 1st. So just be careful. First month in the income tax year, same as the fiscal year. Typically the accrual method, that's going to be our default. Even if you think, if you think you should be on a cash basis, really think through that because it's really not the case most of the time. Even if we enter our data into the system as kind of a cash basis system, we still have certain things that will be on an accrual basis, like accounts receivable, like accounts payable, like recording things like equipment. So you probably almost always would want to keep the default of an accrual method, even though the data input that we might do may be closer to a cash basis. So be careful of switching that to a cash basis. The close the books option can really be useful in some cases. If we select that, prevents any changes to transaction dated earlier than the closing date. In other words, there's a lot of problems with entering transactions prior to the date of close or in the prior time period because it can throw things off. If you want to restrict that particular area or error or problem, then you can do so, or you have that option that can help you to prevent some of that. If we go to the company type information, we have once again the tax form that we saw previously in the company tab. So we're going to keep that as is. We're going to go to the chart of accounts. The main thing we have here is the enable account numbers or not. If we want account numbers, they can be very useful for us to have more control over what order the accounts will be in. But many times, many users don't really understand the account numbers, and it might be easier to let QuickBooks just do the default, which is to order by type, and then within each type in alphabetical order. Then we could also add tips, and this could be a reminder for ourselves if we wanted to add tips, so we can go through and you can test out the tips and look through the types of accounts and the types of tips that might help us to do the data input when we set up new accounts within the chart of accounts. Then we'll go to the categories down. We have the track classes and track location. These are going to be special kind of fields that will be very useful in certain cases. So if we have a separation of the data that we want to separate for some reason into separate classes, or we have different locations and we want to be able to separate and run reports based on class or location, this can be useful. We're not going to do that for the start here. Most small businesses won't be using class tracking or locations, but in many specialized areas, in many types of areas where that can be useful, nice thing to have. We're not going to turn them on here. Automation, we'll keep the defaults with the automation. I recommend keeping these defaults and making sure that if these aren't the defaults you're seeing, you might want to put them in. It's going to help us to enter the data a lot easier, and that's going to be the really thing we want to see, and that's why we're going to enter 2 months of data input. Why? because the first month will be a little more difficult because the system won't know how to enter it. It won't be able to memorize or help us out from prior transactions, prior data input. Later, it will be easier because of the automation. So the first one is to pre-fill forms with previously entered content. So that means when we add a new form, it's going to try to populate that form, which means it'll pull over the data, making the data input faster just by inputting it faster, and also give us a reminder and say, hey, this is what you did last time. You probably want to do something similar this time, which is typically the case with accounting. So the next one is automatically apply credits. So when we have something that's going to be applied, when we have credits that should be applied, then it will apply the credit typically. For example, if we were to have an invoice and to a customer that had an overpayment or some type of credit that we can apply to it, then it's going to try to do that for us. And it's useful because it'll remind us that we need to have that. Automatically invoice unbilled activity. We're going to keep that unchecked for now, and automatically apply bill payments. Once again, something that could be easier for us to just kind of remember. The system's going to do that, and we can say, hey, it's easier for us to see that is there and then unapply it if we need to, rather than forgetting to apply it in the first place. So those are going to be some useful items to have, the automation. We're then going to go to the projects. We'll keep the default setting here. This is going to be for specialized industries, typically job costing areas. Then we'll go to the time tracking. Time tracking is a feature. You can think of it kind of like if you're checking in and out of a job, it's going to track the time in that way. Many times industries will use this because it'll help them to process payroll as well as help with the billing. But just as often, many people use systems outside of QuickBooks to do kind of time tracking and then enter the payroll based on the time that has been accumulated. We won't be using a lot of the time tracking as we enter the data into our practice file. We will keep the default settings. Then we'll go to the currency. It's nice within the QuickBooks Online that we can have this change. If we are dealing in different areas, we can change, of course, the currency. We here are going to be using the United States dollar, so we'll keep the United States dollar. If you do have multiple currencies, you can select this items, and there are options there. We won't get into multiple currency here in the example problem. That could add a lot of complications. So we're going to go to the other preferences. We have the default format of the date, which is the month, the day, and then the year. We'll keep that. It may be useful to have this other defaults in different areas. For example, we may want the year first sometimes in order to order the information by year first if we're going to sort documentation by date. So we'll keep the default now. It could be useful. Just note where you're at, what you're using this information for, and see if you want to change that up. The number format, we're going to have the standard commas. So you got the 3 digits, the comma, the decimal, and then the 2 digits for the cents. This is going to just be the default. This will be the standard. If we want anything other than the standard, if we're in different locations, then of course you could check out the other standards. Customer labels, what do we want to call the customers? Typically, we'll just call them customers, but it may be the case we're in a special industry. We might call them members, donors, special people in some cases. We could have them a different name that we might have that would be in our emails possibly or in our forms or in our documentation. Then we have some warnings. Warn if duplicate check number is used. Really useful because that check number, if it's duplicated number, it's an indication that there's a problem. So typically we will keep that even if we're not entering checks or writing checks from the QuickBooks system, because we're still going to be entering or using some checks. Even if we're using limited checks, we typically have some, and that check number is a check against, it's an internal control against errors. Warn if duplicate bill number is used. We could do this as well, although it's not as big a deal. It's not as important a process as with the check numbers. The default setting is to not have that on. We'll keep that out here as well. Sign me out if inactive for. We currently have the default of an hour. So if we've got QuickBooks open, every time we leave QuickBooks, every time we leave our desk, we should sign out of QuickBooks and then go back into it and sign back in. If we don't do that, then QuickBooks will sign out for us. The default is an hour. If we wanted to make it longer or something different than that, we can do so. So we'll go ahead and save those, and those will be our account settings. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.